This is my story of crippling social anxiety and how it gripped my life for more than a decade and how I overcame it. These three books altogether transformed my mindset and social anxiety. I've struggled with crippling social anxiety for most of my life. And recently, I saw something that brought it all back to mind. A couple weeks back, I was watching this NBA game, and as the broadcast continued, they aired an interview with two basketball legends, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Shaquille O'Neal.
And I want to tell Shaq, because he felt that I was shaming you or ignoring you, and that would never be the case. I'm on your side, Shaq. Don't ever let anybody tell you anything different.
And listen, I will never ever have beef with the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You ain't got to worry about that.
I was very curious. I had never in my life heard of disputes or beef between these two players, so I did some digging. And what I discovered was a decades-long feud that started all the way back during a commercial shoot with the two. Apparently, during this interview, Kareem walked out of the room, giving the cold shoulder to Shaq and not even making eye contact with him. What struck me most about this is that Kareem identifies himself as reserved, quiet, which sometimes just leads into this situation of him rubbing people the wrong way. And for me, someone that struggles with these traits, I found this to be deeply, deeply relatable. Now, of course, I don't know any of these people personally, but as someone who struggled to communicate because of shyness and introversion, as someone who has definitely rubbed people the wrong way because of social anxiety, I can understand this situation. This is my story of crippling social anxiety and how it gripped my life for more than a decade and how I overcame it. Social anxiety is a strange and unique feeling. It feels like you have an elephant sitting on your chest when meeting a group of new people. It feels like a sense of dread, of embarrassing yourself in a social situation. These are things that crippled me as a human being for a long time. My story of all this started when I was a kid. When I was around 5 to 10 years old, I was blunt, I was loud, I was annoying, and I had no filter. I would just say whatever was on my mind when it was on my mind. And for a time, this was pretty good for making friends. But at the same time, it pissed a lot of people off. Other kids, my teachers, my parents. And yet, I persisted like this for many, many years. And it wasn't until middle school where I thought to myself, why can't I just be like all the other quiet kids? Maybe if I start acting like them, other people will like me again. And in some ways, I got exactly what I asked for. Turns out it's pretty easy to just shut down your mouth and not say anything. But over time, I realized that turning this back on, going back to being social and just saying whatever is on your mind is nowhere near as easy. And halfway through middle school, I realized that I was stuck in this state. And I had started to develop a heavy amount of shyness and avoidance of social situations. And then I started to feel that elephant just sitting on my chest all the time. Every time I talked to someone new or when we had a group project or something. And it became worse through all of middle school and eventually high school. I didn't go to any of the big high school events, the dances, the sports games. I didn't join any clubs. And like a lot of other people, when college came around, I felt it was an opportunity to reinvent myself. I thought, surely this problem that I had for 5 to 10 years, it would be easy to change it. I started to read a lot of posts on Reddit, and I got a lot of advice from people like, just fake it till you make it. Yeah, I can do that, right? So that's what I tried to do. I tried to flip a switch, use all my energy, and become as social as possible. It worked for a time, but I remember just being so exhausted after every social interaction I had. And I still remember that elephant sitting on my chest all the while. And after a while, I kind of just started to retreat back into my shell, harder than I had ever before. But in my second year, I pushed myself to join on-campus organizations, just in an attempt to change myself again. And while it was exhausting, it was extremely rewarding. I was able to finally connect with a number of people and finally make a social circle that I was happy with. But my social anxiety, it was always lurking. Every time I thought I had conquered it, every time I thought I was in the past, it would come up again. Something new would happen to trigger it. Whether it was an awkward interaction or an embarrassing moment, it would all just flare up and be just as bad as before. if not worse. And unfortunately, this is where the downside of having a larger network came into play. I began to rub people the wrong way. Similar to the story about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from the beginning. Running into an acquaintance on campus was something that would fill me with anxiety. Every time I would see someone on campus while walking around, I would think of other social interactions with someone I met that just became awkward and embarrassing for myself. And as a result, I just started to avoid eye contact or pretend I didn't see these people or just avoid them altogether. And over time, people that didn't know me saw me as someone who apparently was too good to talk to them and that I didn't care for them. And in turn, I would be given the cold shoulder by people who just didn't know this about me. And every time this would happen, my social anxiety would just get worse and worse and worse. And I would just tell myself things like, why can't people just see the best in me? Why can't people just understand how hard it is for me to communicate with them? I graduated college with not that many deep connections and no real close social circle because of my inability to connect with people. And in a lot of other ways after this point, things were going to get much, much worse before they got any better. I really started to spiral in some of my ways. Around my friends from college, I was never able to create a social connection with them because I wouldn't be able to communicate with them or let them into my life. Even something as simple as like a handshake when meeting up with your friends was something that was intensely stressful for me. And even just simple things like ordering food at a fast food restaurant, walking into a Target, getting into an Uber, these all became stressful experiences. And every time a horrible social interaction would happen, I would just go home and I would just think about it over and over and over, just replaying the scenarios in my head, just trying to block out the pain. And during this time, I just developed a pretty self-defeatist mindset. I kept thinking, why couldn't I get this? I would think about every time I had a group social interaction and I would say something and then suddenly everyone stops talking. And in a lot of ways, I was in true denial that I had social anxiety. I feel like in my brain, this was all something that I could break out of easily at any time. And there's some sort of trick that people use to keep themselves at 100% social energy all the time. But none of this really happened. Not overnight, anyway. There was never one moment where I felt like I needed to make a change. It was just a gradual realization that I would need to take action in order for my social anxiety and my social skills to improve. But I do remember how it all started with one book. I remember one day looking up on Amazon how to talk to people, and the book How to Win Friends and Influence People popped up. And initially I thought, if I buy this book, this is an immediate admission to myself that I'm a loser and I can't make friends. But despite those thoughts, I still saw numerous people online talk about how transformative this book was for their social skills and for their life. And I thought, sure, I have nothing to lose. But this book opened my eyes in a way that I could not have ever imagined. My whole life, I had seen social interactions as something inefficient, something to avoid, something that was not necessary. But I realized that social interactions, talking to people, forming a human connection is something that can be uniquely beautiful if you do it right. My problems I had with social anxiety, about not being able to talk to people, about rubbing people the wrong way, it was all a result of me not having the correct framework to follow when talking to people or when getting into social situations. And for this book, these were the two main takeaways that I still think about every single day. Never criticize or complain. In a lot of households, criticism is used as something to motivate people when it can actually be really detrimental. And while constructive criticism is helpful and necessary, negative criticism can lead to resentment, animosity, even if you are in the right. People just simply react differently to criticism, and it's not worth making enemies over something that can be handled constructively. In the past, I would drive people away with unconscious criticism, which was a root cause in my inability to make friendships with some people. And similarly, avoiding complaining as much as possible. Complaining was something I did all the time, and I believe my constant complaining drove people to distance themselves or just avoid me altogether. And for me, I was doing a lot of these things unconsciously, and I realized that no one is going to tell you that you're complaining too much. It's just something that you're going to have to realize yourself. You can't win an argument. The most effective way to resolve a disagreement is to avoid participating in an argument. What's meant by this is not to avoid conflict altogether, but to avoid winning by destroying someone else's pride. No argument is ever won. You may win an argument, but the other person, they might be feeling bitter and the relationship is damaged and not the same. This can lead to problems in the future. This person is probably going to be less likely to hang out with you. This person is probably not going to want to help you out with things. And you might say again that this is a problem with other people and not yourself. But again, in life, do we want to make enemies unnecessarily? Arguments in life are inevitable, which is why it's important to learn how to fight well by controlling your temper, by listening first and actively, by looking for areas of agreement in your argument, and by seeing things from your opponent's point of view. The second book I read that helped me with my social anxiety was called The Social Skills Handbook. From reading this book, I've learned valuable lessons that have made a hugely positive impact on my social interactions. And the single most important lesson I learned was that awkward conversations are normal and natural. There are two parties to every conversation, and it's not the job of one person to carry the whole thing. That's not to say you don't have to make improvements in how you talk to people and engage with people, but just knowing that sometimes you're just going to run into awkward conversations with certain people has helped reduce my social anxiety tremendously. I no longer feel the pressure to fill in the silence or to attempt to carry the conversation by asking a million questions. I can just be myself. And the last, most significant takeaway I got from the book was that avoiding awkward interactions is only going to make your anxiety worse. Every time you avoid someone on the street because you're too awkward to talk to them will only make the next time it happens worse on your social anxiety. Embracing our anxieties and learning to improve them is the key to growth and improvement. The last book I read was 13 Things Mentally Strong People Do. And this was a book that truly helped me understand the habits in my life that are holding me back. Don't feel sorry for yourself. Learning from mistakes is a good thing, but self-pitying is a cycle that will just lead you down this slippery slope of negative thinking. By reframing situations and thinking of them as learning experiences rather than as the world crashing down on you can help shift your mindset and move forward. Whenever I would have an embarrassing social situation or a messed up handshake or I avoided someone out of social anxiety, I would think about these things for days, months, years. But in reality, I should have been shifting my focus towards helping myself. No one is going to teach me how to be a social human being. Only I can figure that out for myself. Don't focus on things you can't control. In reality, there are certain things that are just completely outside of my control. My example is when I realized that certain people just didn't like me. And while there are certain aspects of my personality that I can control, like being more friendly, smiling more, being less awkward and more natural in conversations, there's a lot that I cannot control. There are people in the world that will take one look at you and decide, I don't like you. That's something you can't do anything about. But using time and resources to wonder about why or what you can do is a massive waste of time that could be redirected at making yourself better or by strengthening your own relationships with people that matter. These 3 books altogether transformed my mindset and social anxiety. I mentally reference concepts from these books every single day. And the most important things was that I practice these concepts every day. However, I don't want to oversell myself. I still have phases of massive social anxiety where I feel like I can't talk to anyone, where I feel awkward, where I feel alone. But overall, I don't feel crippled by this problem that had a stranglehold over me for over 10 years. No longer am I unable to order food, talk to strangers. No longer do I revisit my awkward conversations over and over and over again before I'm about to go to sleep. The last thing I wanted to leave as a thought is that once upon a time, I thought that being an introvert was a massive disadvantage to my life, when in reality, there are unique advantages and perspectives to being an introvert. People who listen first and speak second actually have a unique ability to identify and empathize with people's non-verbal interactions, probably just because they spent more time observing people in their life. I feel like all of my years of listening has made me better at understanding people's emotions. So in that regard, it's important to lean into your strengths and try not to change or ditch them all when you're on this journey for yourself.